Have you ever wondered what happens when we die? Inside of this episode today, I'm going to be talking about the process on the spiritual side of what happens when someone transitions into spirit. But I'm also going to be talking about the top lessons I've learned from spirit and what they really want to share with you today on the podcast. Things from the spiritual world that they wish they would have done while they were living. I truly believe that we are here to live our life purpose in abundance. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to get to the end of my life and go, oh my gosh, I missed it. Oh my gosh, I missed out. So much information inside this episode of the transition process, what happens when we get into spirit, and what can we do now before we get there. All right, stay tuned. Welcome to Spiritual and Ambitious. I'm your host, Whitney McNeill. I'm a certified medium and spiritual teacher, and I help spiritual and ambitious souls just like you live your life purpose through your career and attract abundance by connecting into your intuition and spirit guides. Let's get spiritual and ambitious. Before we dive into this episode, I want to give a shout out to Light Dancer 9. Light Dancer 9 says, I love how down to earth Whitney is and all the information and tips she provides in her podcast. She is genuine and authentic and comes from a place of positivity that leaves the listener feeling inspired. Thank you so much, Light Dancer 9. I love reading these reviews, and we have a podcast review giveaway. So you can go over to messengerspirit.com/podcast review with all the details. And don't forget to share your review on social and do that with the hashtag spiritual and ambitious love so that you're entered to win. All right. Today, we're going to be talking about something that is nothing business related. I know that you really want to live your purpose through your career. One of the big questions I will get is, Whitney, what happens when we die? So this is one of those topics that I wanted to bring some light to. I know you're interested in communicating with your spirit guides and your loved ones who have passed over into spirit. So what happens actually when we die? First and foremost, the dying process looks very different here on the earth plane than it does in the spiritual plane. So throughout my years of talking to spirit, and when I used to do readings, I would get a lot of questions about, were they in pain when they passed? Did they know what was going on? Did they know I was in the room? And the best way I can explain it, let's talk about somebody who might be in hospice, for an example. You see the physical body lying there, but what happens energetically is that the person who's transitioning is halfway out of their body, depending on the process. Sometimes they're fully out, and when they're fully out, they can still be somewhat connected until they finally let go. Or they can be kind of half in and half out. You'll see a lot of this with dementia patients or patients who are very close to transitioning. They kind of move in and out. And in fact, when I would read someone, let's say that I had a client who was asking about someone who was older, sometimes that person in question will read like they're already in spirit. And sometimes they read as if they are still here, and then they go to spirit and they're kind of back and forth. I've had many a time where someone who was older, it read that they were kind of already in spirit, almost like their soul is preparing. So before we even get to the transition point, and this is talking more about the natural death process, or when we know that someone's going to be transitioning at some point, you'll see that person sleeping more. And when they're sleeping more, they're hanging out in the astral plane preparing. They're talking to friends and family. They're talking to their spirit guides, and they're preparing for transition. You'll also see people recounting their memories. And so sometimes you'll see someone say, don't you see that person over there? Or, hey, mom, and they're talking to spirit that they're already seeing. even though the other people who are around them may not think that they're making any sense. Now, they also will talk about memories. So sometimes you're thinking, what in the world is going on here? What's really happening is they are downloading certain memories into their spiritual body. So we have our physical body, and then we have our mind outside of our body. This is why you're able to pick up on other people's thoughts or emotions, especially if you're an empath, because thoughts and emotions exist outside of the body. And when we pass into spirit, the body dies, but the mind does not. This is why we are still able to communicate with spirit, and they can give us different memories that they've had when we were together or provide evidence as to who they are. So when you see your loved one talking about these memories, and these can be things that you can't quite make sense of, most of the time, they're downloading these into their mind. Now, when I pass into spirit, one of the intentions I have is to only download the highlights because I don't want to bog my energy down with all the details. Now, of course, when you are in spirit, you can choose to become lighter. You can also release some of those memories. So when a loved one in spirit comes through in a reading, some loved ones have all the details. I know where your watch is, and I know what that vase looks like over in the right corner of your bedroom. And here's all these details about everything we used to do together. And then some loved ones in spirit have chosen to release those memories so they become lighter. They still have the highlights, and they don't have as many details. It's just kind of like, here's the general highlights of what I remember. So if you've ever wondered why some loved ones are really chatty and have a lot of details, and some loved ones are more, matter of fact, or, here's what it is. This is all I got for you. Then it's because they've only taken those highlights. So they will have memories. We just might not have all the details. So to answer the question, did my loved one know I was in the room? My answer really depends on that loved one. Sometimes they are aware, and sometimes they are not as aware because they're really focused on the transition process. Many times I've gotten the question, is my loved one in spirit in pain, or were they in pain? And largely the answer is no. I was already outside of the body and I wasn't connected in. So whereas it may have looked like I was in pain, I really wasn't there. I was already outside of my body. When loved ones transition into spirit, they also choose their timing. Sometimes they choose to go when no one's around. And the people on the earth plane can feel really upset about it because they didn't get their last goodbye. But their loved one who transitioned wanted to choose that time because they felt it would be too hard on perhaps both parties. Sometimes a loved one in spirit really needs to hear it's okay to go in order to allow them to release. But rest assured that they have support around them when they transition, and they see certain people when they quote unquote cross over. So stay with me after this quick break, and I'll talk about who meets your loved ones in spirit when they transition. And I'm also going to be telling you about why some loved ones cannot come through to visit us and why some can. I'll be back after this quick break. This episode is sponsored by my free Spirit Guide Masterclass. Inside, you'll learn the 5 C's of Spirit Guide communication, your role with your Spirit Guides, 2 proven effective strategies to stop second guessing yourself and your intuition, and the single most important step to understand your intuitive guidance, along with 4 ways to perceive your spiritual intuitive messages. You'll also be getting a workbook to go through this class as well. You can join at messengerofspirit.com/free class. Thanks for staying with me. All right. So your loved ones, when they transition into spirit, they are greeted by a welcome committee. And that welcome committee can be comprised of spirit guides and or loved ones in spirit. When they transition into spirit, they are not welcomed by every single loved one that they knew, because it is quite overwhelming at first. One, you've just made the transition. You are trying to figure out this whole spiritual body, and you've also left behind the earth plane world. The welcome committee, usually about 5 spirits, will pepper in some loved ones in spirit that they recognize, and the spirit guides that are going to help them and say, hey, welcome, we're happy you're here. It can take a little bit of adjustment to feel like I know what's going on. And then there's an orientation committee, and that orientation committee will help guide the spirit about how to operate in this new, let's say, dimension. So this orientation committee helps the spirit acclimate to getting used to this new way of being. Now, depending on the spirit, depending on the vibration level of the spirit, and depending on how prepared the spirit was for transitioning, it may take a longer amount of time as we would view it on the earth plane, or it may take a short amount of time. It just truly depends on the growth of the spirit and the awareness of the spirit. So for an example, a medium who's very used to the spiritual world might not feel as shocked when they go into spirit because they're more acclimated. Most of the time, if you are interested in spiritual development, then you're aware of astral travel and have had some sort of experiences there, so it makes it a bit easier too. Someone who was not planning on going into spirit, someone that had their life fully ahead of them and just abruptly leaves the earth plane world, generally speaking, could have a longer time to transition. Generally speaking, may have a longer amount of time to completely accept and embrace this transition. So what happens to the people who transition, quote unquote, early or abruptly or violently? It really depends on those people who've crossed over into spirit. So there's what we call a healing process or a healing cocoon. And sometimes that person needs to kind of decompress for a good while. And I have had people in spirit come through and they've passed 3 days ago. And then I haven't had people come through and they transitioned 50 plus years ago. So it's really all relative to the spirit's experience. I've had loved ones in spirit come through in a reading who passed violently and they were able to come through and they just accepted the process and they were really interested in communicating with their loved ones in spirit. And if a loved one in spirit does not come through for you, please know that it's not personal. There are a couple reasons why they will not come through. One, they can be going through a healing process on their own, and it kind of reminds me of a shock to the system. So they need some extra time to accept that process. I think of it as a decompression process where it's kind of like I'm in a healing state for a good while and I need to kind of acclimate and come back to this place and awareness. Now, another reason that your loved one in spirit may not come through is because they feel like it would provide too much grief on your behalf. And I know that the person who wants a reading wants to communicate with their guides, and they are adamant that if they hear from this loved one that they will feel better. But in fact, sometimes it's not the case. There's not been enough time that has passed, and both parties may not have really felt like they were able to fully heal or integrate. Even though you might want to connect your loved one in spirit, they may not be ready to come through because they're still healing, or they think that you still need to heal, because it could open up a lot of wounds. Even though talking to spirit is a beautiful healing process, sometimes things are just too raw. Another reason why they may not come through is because you do hold a lot of grief and emotion around you, and it needs some time to dissipate for you to really receive what they're saying. So if you're in a real stage of grief and the loved one in spirit said, it was fine, this was my time, even though we didn't expect it, the person that's still living may reject that message and refuse to accept it. Now, another exciting reason that they're not able to come through is because your loved one in spirit is actually living their life over there and might be going through a training process. So when we're in spirit, we always continue to grow and to learn. And truly, on a spiritual level, our spiritual path, our spiritual purpose is to get higher and closer to that universal source and intelligence and love. So when we're in spirit, we can still learn and grow. This is why some spirits choose to be spirit guides. And spirit guides are not just haphazardly called spirit guides. They actually go through a training program. So if you could think about our earth plane, we have people that want to be counselors. We have people that want to be teachers. And in order to teach and in order to be a counselor, you have to learn. You have to have an education. You have to know what you're doing. In the spiritual world, our spirit guides are trained in those different capacities. And one of the big ones is that they need to make sure that they know how to communicate with us in a safe way. So your loved ones in spirit might be going through a training process to become a guide. Another big question I get, are my loved ones in spirit my spirit guides? 99% of the time, the answer is no. Now, that doesn't mean that your loved one in spirit cannot come through and give you some wonderful advice or their opinion. And I've had many of those, especially when there is a parent-child connection. I've seen dads come through and give their child information about their car or their house, or they need to fix the pipes, or they need to look at their tires. I've had moms come through and talk about the grandchildren and the cooking, anything else that the mom wants to share. Now, I know that those just sounded like stereotypical roles, but I'm giving you just some experiences about what I have seen in readings and how they've come through. But again, everyone's advice and experience is relative. But your loved ones in spirit do not always agree with your spirit guides. This is one reason they are not your guides. If your loved one in spirit was your guide, they most likely would not be objective. So those lessons that you need to learn in this lifetime, the karma that you need to complete, your loved one in spirit might try to guide you away from it because they know there might be a little heartache involved. But your spirit guides are like, no, you need to learn this lesson. This is part of your path. Your loved one in spirit also has to go through training, like I was just talking about. So you already have enough guides, so you don't really have an opening. Your loved one in spirit may not be your vibrational match, so it really wouldn't be as helpful as you might want it to be. While you might love to have your loved one as a guide, most likely it's not going to be the right fit. So if you're a business owner and your mom was not a business owner, probably not going to be as insightful and helpful for you as you grow your business and make big changes. Before we close, I wanted to give you some thoughts and some insights from our loved ones in spirit. One of the big ones is our loved ones want us to enjoy this earth plane as much as possible. And I've seen some loved ones have some regrets because they didn't enjoy this body or this earth plane fully. And they worried and they didn't truly enjoy the time they were here. When we are on the earth plane, it is the best learning training ground. Everything is so real and tangible, and we can touch things. In spirit, that is not the same. So because our experience on earth is more vivid, like right in front of us, literally, we get to really experience through our senses, because it's so vivid and sometimes polarizing, we are able to learn lessons faster and grow our vibration faster. When we're in spirit, we don't have that vivid, tangible experience to grow as fast. Now, there's plenty of opportunities to grow in spirit. You can be a guide, you can learn different concepts, you can continue your learning and your education in the spiritual world, but this is a great opportunity. Now, another regret that I have heard from spirit is not taking advantage of the opportunities. And when they got to the end of their lives, feeling like they missed out on things because they were too scared to say yes. They were too scared to say yes to those things that they truly, really wanted. And sometimes these I'm afraid of saying yeses was because they were living their life really through someone else or for someone else, or they felt guilty. I felt guilty to say yes because of my children, or I felt guilty to say yes because of my spouse. And really, it comes down to, I wish I would have made that leap. Another one is, I wish I would have seen the world. I wish I would have traveled. I wish I wouldn't have been too scared. And I wish that I wouldn't have made excuses. And when I say excuses, this means for everything. Another lesson that I've received from Spirit is I wish I would have told people how I felt, and I wish that I would have been really honest. And this includes telling people that you love them. I've heard some, I missed my chance. With missing their chance, kind of comes down to two things. One is, I wish I would have spent more time with so-and-so. This is usually around family. I missed my chance around a romantic love, or I missed my chance because I didn't say yes and I didn't have enough confidence or courage in myself to just do it. So I hope those lessons and those messages really hit home so that you really feel, I'm not going to waste another darn minute here. I'm going to live my purpose more fully. I am going to communicate with Spirit. I'm going to say yes to the opportunities that they give me. I'm going to invest in myself, whether it's money or time, when I know it's part of my path. And I'm going to truly live my life in joy. Now, if you want to communicate more with your loved ones, you can do that through your spirit guides. And I've got some resources for this. If you haven't taken my free spirit guide masterclass, I highly recommend it. I'll link to it in the show notes. And if you want to learn how to clearly receive your intuitive messages and communicate with your spirit guides, you can work with me through my 4 Intuitive Languages course. I will link to that in the show notes as well. I will see you in the next episode, but until then, here's to staying spiritual and ambitious. Thanks so much for listening to this episode. And if you loved it, would you please share it with a friend? I would also love your review and a reminder to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can find me at messengerofspirit.com, and you can take the 4 Intuitive Languages quiz and find show notes there too. If you want to connect on YouTube, Facebook, or Instagram, you can find me at Messenger of Spirit. If you want to continue the conversation, join my free Facebook group at messengerofspirit.com/group. I'll meet you right here next week. Here's to staying spiritual and ambitious.
This podcast is part of the Sound Advice FM network. Sound Advice FM. Women's voices amplified.